Hello, everyone. Welcome to our EVP workshop today. Delighted to have you all with us. I think this workshop here has been one of the kind of record signups for us. We've had almost 400 people sign up to listen to us today, which is pretty amazing, both live and on demand. I believe that everyone can hear me. I always check because people are saying in the chat there, I always worry that I'm not actually live. But welcome. Really excited to have you all here today. Just some kind of brief housekeeping stuff and helping you to kind of get the most out of this session. It's more of a workshop style. In the past, if you've been to any of our webinars, they've been a bit more webinar style with kind of a bit of time at the end for questions. But we will be doing this as half discussion between David and I and half your questions. So if you see in that chat where people are kind of chatting at the moment, to the right of that icon, there is something that says questions. Please at any time pop questions in there. There will also be people on LinkedIn asking questions because this is being streamed to multiple different places on LinkedIn too. So we'll be collating all of that and hopefully we'll be able to use our data and experience and give you some advice on those burning questions that you have. But we want to make sure this is as useful as possible for you. This will be recorded. Someone asking there in the chat. So this same link will turn into a video recording at the end of this session, meaning you can share it with anybody that you would find useful, or if you have to dash off at a certain point, obviously you can catch up. So yeah, that's kind of everything I think that's important to cover. First of all, I guess introductions. So I'm Molly. I am the CEO and co-founder of Flexa. Many of you probably already know Flexa, but for those of you that don't, Flexa is the place where flexible companies get discovered. So we actually launched about 3 weeks before the pandemic hit, trying to bring total transparency to the flexible working market. Now, fast forward to now, it's no longer just the nice to have. Flexibility is a must have for around 80% of the global office population, which is 300 million people all around the world. And here at Flexa, we shine a light on exactly what it's like to work at a company before someone has even come across your company. So they will find you based on how you work, not just the jobs that you have open. So it's all about bringing awareness to your flexible working and EVP overall. We've now grown to 1.3 million users all over the world using Flexa as the source of truth for flexibility. And Ben, which is the company that David is from, are recently flexified too. So we have to give a big shout out to the fact that you are embracing flexibility, truly, and your flexification process, you got absolutely amazing scores. So I'll hand over to David to introduce himself and Ben.
Amazing. Thanks, Molly. Yeah, we're super excited both to be here to talk about this, the topic around EVP, as well as to have gone through that process. So for those of you who don't know me, so I'm David. I'm one of the co-founders and the COO here at Ben. Ben, we're a flexible benefits platform for global teams, right? And so we really believe, again, in the same mantra around flexibility, and we can talk a little bit more about why that is. And I think it very much relates to the topic of what we're talking about here today. In a nutshell, Ben, we are an all-in-one flexible benefits platforms for global teams where individuals get to pick the benefits that matter most to them, all the way from what you would typically classify as traditional benefits products, maybe health insurance, life insurance, pensions, retirement products, etc., as well as flexible benefits budgets that employees can then allocate either to core benefits or to other things outside of the platform that matter more to them. So think about health and well-being stipends, work from home stipends, anything that an employee thinks is really important for them to be at their best. In terms of the company, we've been around for about 3 years, over around 200 clients or so, and scaling quite quickly, mainly focused on mid-market companies between 200 to a couple thousand employees, and really trying to bring that flexible vision and help companies to make their benefits as flexible as possible.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that info. So yeah, you've got one side of us is flexible working environments, level of EVP, and the other side, David, there is with the benefit side of EVP. And actually together, that does make up the vast majority of an EVP, but we'll dive into that shortly. One very quick thing is in the top right corner, you'll see a CTA that says take the quiz there. That's our Flexa benchmarking. So it brings into account all of those things that will shape an EVP: location, hours, benefits, culture, mission, vision, and helps you to understand how competitive that is versus the market. So totally free, takes 2 minutes, and you'll get all of your customized insights if you'd like to click that link at some point during the webinar or afterwards. So let's kick off with the first sort of discussion point. What is an EVP? and why is it crucial for businesses? Why are we sitting here talking about it today, David?
Yeah, so so EVP, right, employer value proposition. To us, there's a lot of different definitions to it, right? The way that I think about it is, what is it that you uniquely as a business can add to the people that work for you, and that is a combination of everything you do, right? So it's obviously, reward, right? Typically, that would mean compensation, benefits, salary, variable pay, and that might take a lot of different forms depending on where you are as a company. But also, your culture, progression, mission, the ways of working, and how do you package all of that up into something that is really attractive for the people who you might want to attract to the business, or the people who are working for you currently, right? That's kind of the simplest way that I think can think about it. Yeah, how would you define it, Molly?
I think really similar. I think, yeah, what is it that would make somebody want to work for you? Because I think EVP is both about how people perceive your company as a potential employer, but also experience your company internally. There's loads of different definitions, and I think different people might include different bits in it. I actually pretty much exactly agree with what you've put in there. I think it's your working environment, your benefits, your culture, your mission, your ways of working, potentially salary if you're a particularly, above average payer, I suppose. And then it's packaging all of those things in to your employer brand marketing. So like EVP is effectively what you will go out and market to people, both externally and internally, which then means you're basically putting your EVP in places that people want to see it. I think that employer value proposition has like really evolved over time. I think it used to be seen as quite like, this is what we pay, this is where our office is, and these are the benefits that you get. And those benefits were usually like really boring, like pension, 25 days holiday, maybe
A
better.
lot of times, not even benefits, right? It's like statutory
Yeah.
stuff that it's like, hey, we have to offer this by law, and we're going to market it. Yeah,
And we'll come to the red flags later, because that's one big red flag, is packaging stuff up that's actually you have to offer it by law, but trying to make it sound really good.
exactly.
Definitely is that one. But I think it's all of the things that make your business uniquely a great place to work, and owning that, because I think a lot of companies will often worry, maybe if you're a startup in particular and you don't have loads of money to throw at your employer value proposition, you worry that maybe what you're offering isn't enough. Whereas actually, you want to be as transparent and as clear as possible about what you offer in order to appeal to the people that want to work in the way that you do. So if you are a startup, for example, your startup culture is going to be a massive part of your EVP. Or if you're a big corporate, the security of that role is going to be a massive part of your EVP. It's very much all about why somebody would want to work for you, and owning that and showcasing it in the best and most kind of wide-reaching places possible.
Yeah, and I think, the thing that really matters, or the thing that we spend a lot of time thinking, is what can you do that might be unique to you, right, as a company in terms of what you do, because it's quite easy to be very bland about it, in the sense of like, hey, we're a startup, therefore we offer this. We're a big company, therefore we offer that. But I think you can really tie it into as we said, right, like the mission, the culture that you want to create, and how can you attract the right kinds of people for where you are as a company as well. But I think it's I think sometimes in conversations that I've had around this in the past, people are very fixated on, hey, this is the thing that we need to have for 10 years, right? Whereas I think your EVP will change, right? Because the types of people that you need to attract will change. And we tend to think about that a lot, right? Like, as an example, right, we're going through a bit of a growth journey right now. We've never had actually very experienced benefits folks work for us, but we're now at a point where, because we wanted fresh ways of thinking, et cetera, and not having the dogma in the industry, but now we're trying to attract more experienced people who have been, and what will matter to them will be completely different than what mattered to the folks who joined us when we were just a 5 people and a dog in an office, right? And I think that's really important to recognize, because how you package it up and how you talk about it should change over time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, is that often what's seen as the EVP, they see it as quite static, and that loads of work needs to be done in order to get this proposition ready to then launch it. But in reality, people are constantly experiencing your company at various different stages. You can't just suddenly decide that an EVP appears after 3 years. It's constantly iterating. And it is, as you say, it's a journey. When you're a 5-person and a dog in an office startup, what you can afford and what you want to showcase is very different to when you're at 20, 200, 2,000 people. And I think one of the things that I would definitely take away from like watching how companies showcase themselves and how we've gone through that is, you've always got something good enough to show off. So make sure that you are, because then you will attract the aligned talent that will thrive in the environment that you are offering.
Yeah, you just gotta find it as well, right? So I think in terms of we get asked a lot about, hey, what if I don't have a lot of budget for benefits, for example, where I can't pay top of market? Well, you can frame that in a way where, hey, you join us, you get to shape what you get, right? Like you get to see that there are a lot of different ways that you can lean into what others might perceive as weakness and make them into a strength. And I think that's important to recognize. And same with, hey, we don't have an office yet, right? Like, great, remote working, as those types of things. Yeah.
There's lots of stuff that's free, which we'll come on to later when we kind of talk about starting from scratch and I guess quick wins, for lack of a better term. But we mentioned it briefly there about kind of attracting talent and it being a way, obviously, to get people into your company that are aligned. So I guess what evidence have you seen at Ben about how a strong employer value proposition is linked to talent attractiveness, kind of cost to hire and retention as well?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And we're still, it's fair to say that we're still learning throughout the journey and experimenting a lot with what works. In terms of like how we try to perceive ourselves in the market, we do a lot, or we're starting to do more in terms of like the employer branding side of things, right? So we have a great talent team who's constantly kind of trying to profile individual. We very much as a business, right? We're focusing on making the individual employee sort of highlighting their experience, and that also is something that we highlight. So, for example, we have a talent team that does things like TikTok videos, etc., in terms of what are the experience that each individual employee is having at Ben, and highlighting them and making them the center, because we really believe that it's like both in terms of what we're trying to do as a company, right? If you think about offering flexible benefits, it really is about how do we make sure that each individual has what matters to them, right, from a benefits point of view. The trite example that a lot of people usually try to make is, if you're later on in your career, you have kids, you've got a mortgage, the types of benefits that might be relevant to you are very different than if you're earlier on in life, right? So typically things like the more traditional products, right, like life insurance and things like that. If you don't have dependents, like it doesn't matter to me if I'm just young and starting in my career. Whereas what might matter are things like development, right, and sort of ownership opportunity. And so we think a lot about those kinds of things. And as a result of trying to tailor experience to each individual and trying to offer what matters to them, like we definitely see a lot of folks sticking around for longer. And again, that changes over time, right? So recognizing that what was relevant when they first started might not be relevant at all now, and like that needs to evolve.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess those are some of the thoughts in terms of cost to hire, and the attracting of the right candidates also makes a big difference, right? As I mentioned earlier, trying to position ourselves in the market and creating that proposition, right? So like diversity and inclusion is something that's really important to us, and as ever, especially in kind of more technical engineering roles, it might be quite difficult, right, to attract women and minorities, etc. So we spend a lot of time thinking, what do we offer in terms of flexible working? What do we offer in terms of maternity? What do we offer in terms of childcare benefits, right? That might be really helpful to attract those kinds of individuals that also might be a bit more wary of working at a startup, right? Because those things really matter to them, which is where our benefits can also play a big role. And we see that making a big difference in terms of the conversations that we have with candidates as well. Those are some like high level thoughts, I think.
Definitely. And I think, at its sort of core, employer value propositions have the potential to create very happy employees, right? Because they like the environment that they're working in and they like what they're given. And I think happy employees are far more likely to stay at their companies and be very engaged. So the more that you give in these scenarios, the more that you will get back in terms of productivity and engagement and motivation to really perform. And so I think obviously there's that aspect in terms of retention and engagement and the productivity upside, because it's incredibly expensive to hire new people. Like if you look at productivity decline, ramping somebody back up, as well as recruitment fees, it's literally tens of thousands of pounds. So investing in your employees now is a great way to save costs in the long run. But I think also when you look at it from that talent attraction perspective, what we see all the time, and because obviously Flexa is based on showcasing EVPs in order to build brilliant employer brands for companies, we see that strong employer value propositions, or not necessarily even strong, it doesn't have to be super competitive against the market, but well marketed employer value propositions attract people. And when we look at the effect that it has in terms of talent attraction, companies that actually showcase what they offer upfront and enable themselves to get discovered for it, when we've studied the effect that that has, companies are 4 times more attractive to potential employees rather than just randomly throwing an application at a company and not really knowing what they do or what they offer. So you're literally increasing your chances 4 times of somebody considering you as a great place to work. So I think if you're looking for data around why a strong EVP is great, that's definitely one of them.
Just
And I think it also feeds into cost to hire as well, because if you're leading with that information and turning your hiring funnel into a marketing funnel centered on employer value proposition, naturally that's going to be a more efficient process. And again, when we've studied that, we've seen cost to hire reductions of like up to 90% through Flexa, which I think is really interesting when you think about moving hiring away from just this is a job that we need filling to this is the reason you should join our company. It suddenly changes that conversation. As you said, it becomes a much more attractive way of trying to hire and trying to retain talent.
Yeah, I think like a small anecdote on that, right? So one of the things that we did really early on, obviously we believe in benefits, right? Like we're a benefits company, like we think that has a massive difference. And usually where do you find kind of companies talking about their benefits at the bottom of the job ad in with like a couple bullet points that is just basically like, hey, we offer this amount of holidays and maybe private medical insurance. Okay, great. What we actually did is we put that at the top of our job ads, right? So we're like, hey, we really believe it and we really import it, and we go very detailed. And I think a lot of companies, in the way that they market themselves, which is a really good point, Molly, will not make best use of what they have available in that arsenal, right? So even if it might be benefits, it might be other things, but for example, when it comes to the benefits, like there's a big difference between offering, for example, I'm going to go the boring route still, but private medical insurance that doesn't cover pre-existing conditions versus those that does. And I think like being able to highlight those differences, or even being like, hey, most companies at our stage offer XYZ, we do this, that's a bit different, and it might be better than the much benchmark, it might be worse, but like really tailoring it to, again, the type of people that you're trying to offer and what would matter to them, right? And using that as the way to, again, like every touch point, right, is an opportunity to market your EVP and to build that in the market. So that's one of the types of things that we try to think a lot about. Hey, what uniquely resonates to us that we can talk about, and obviously benefits is one of those things.
Yeah. And very often companies will focus much more on the marketing of their product or service rather than marketing themselves as a great place to work. But there should be both of them going on, because your business is a product of those people fundamentally. And you mentioned very briefly about diversity. And I, absolutely couldn't agree more in terms of why transparency about an employer value proposition is so important to diverse talent. Like, I literally always tell the story. So apologies to people that have heard this probably about 5 times before. But like the reason that we started Flexa was because I have an autoimmune disease and I was actually sacked from my role for asking to work from home 1 day a week, because sometimes I literally couldn't walk. My face would swell up, my hands would swell up. And they said they were open to flexible working requests. I was like, cool, I'll put one in after working there for 2 years and struggling through. And 10 days later, they put a settlement package in front of me, sacked me, and told me to leave immediately. So I then went into the job hunting process, wishing that I could just understand where is not just going to tolerate me working from home 1 day a week, but enable me to. And ultimately, there was nowhere servicing that need. Like, you'd have to, as you said, trawl to the bottom of a job description, see, is it saying open to flexible working or another generic term? So it left me none the wiser. And when you look at diverse talent and the needs that we will have, whether it's disabilities and conditions, whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's having children or caring responsibilities, or potentially not necessarily wanting to go into an office environment every day because of various different other reasons that there might be, diverse talent wants to understand upfront if a company is the right fit for them, because it's not as simple as like, oh, I can just work in any environment. Like, you have specific places in which you will thrive and others in which you will not. And so again, try to help if you're trying to make a business case for a better employer value proposition or showcasing it. To give you another stat around how much an improvement showcasing your EVP can make in diversity, we have a client that we work with very closely to monitor the diversity in their talent pipeline. And in the year after joining Flexa, they improved the diversity in their talent pipeline across 4 areas, which is gender, disabilities and conditions, ethnicity, and sexual orientation, by 65%. And that was just through being transparent about what's on offer, because people feel empowered to apply rather than worried about asking for things that otherwise companies might not offer. So it's huge in terms of the diversity of talent that you can then attract. So I would really urge people to be as transparent as possible and avoid what you said of like burying it at the bottom of a job description and like totally not being clear.
And I think that the clarity is important in every step, right? Not just in the way that you portray yourselves as an employer in the job ads, also during every step of the interview, right? So, we, for example, we're a hybrid company, right? Like we believe in having people in the office, people working from home, and we think that's really important across different teams in different ways. Also, trying to optimize for each individual employee, but as a business, we also want to spend time together in person, and we feel that that is important. But that might not be for everybody, right? And so, like being clear around what the expectations are makes for much better and easier conversations down the line as well. So there's just one small example, right? But I think it's really important. And again, it might be different by teams, right? Obviously, it's more work, right? Because you need to tailor everything and how you talk about it, and make sure that hiring managers as well, right, and the talent team are all singing from the same hymn sheet. Because otherwise, you get to later stages of the process, like, hey, we want to make this offer to this person. Great, okay, they're expecting X, Y, Z, and I'm like, well, we do this other thing, and you just wasted everybody's time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, interestingly, a few companies that I've spoken to where they're a little bit more reluctant to be very transparent about it and to build an EVP that they want to externally promote as well as internally. Their fear is that if they showcase it, then they're going to get people that will take the piss. And actually, I think it's almost the
It's the
opposite.
opposite, right? Yeah.
You're finding talent that wants to work in the way that you offer. And even if your EVP is as simple as hybrid working 2 days a week in the office, core hours of 10 till 4, a work from anywhere scheme and a dog friendly office, like that's enough to be shouting about to get super aligned talent. Like it doesn't have to be all singing or dancing. But I find the idea of like, but people will take the piss, like it's literally often the other way around, because you get people that are like, yes, that's how I want to work. I love that. I'm going to go and apply, and they'll often be more productive and actually better off.
Yeah, the clarity, right, is the most important thing, so that people know what they're getting into. And yeah, sure, maybe you're going to attract less folks in the top of the funnel, but that's okay. They're not the right people to be joining if you have a very fundamentally different philosophy, right?
Yeah, and that's the point. It's like people think that employer value propositions are meant to appeal to the broadest possible audience of people. They're not. They're meant to find you the talent that will thrive in that environment. Like you actually want to appeal to a narrower audience of people that have more likelihood of converting into being employees rather than getting 1,000 applications, of which only 100 of them want to work in a hybrid way. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of double clicking, what has improved in terms of on our side, right, from the actual like dollar outcomes, which you think a lot about, right, as a benefits company, like you're spending, for example, you're spending money on these things. What is the result that you're getting as a result of it? I think to your point, Molly, we did a lot of analysis on this, and as you said, right, the average cost to hire, the cost of turnover in the UK across the world is huge, right? So I think we have the stat at around 30K or so, which I think is actually sounds small even to me, knowing as an employer as well what it takes, right, to get people ramped up and to find the right person for the job at the right time. In terms of trying to clarify how we do things and present ourselves in the market, right? What we see by investing into our EVP, into the way that we perceive ourselves and market ourselves as an employer, as for example, reduce need for agency support, right? So the clearer we can get on that, the more we can attract the right kind of folks without having to rely on third-party agency partners. And then also, as I mentioned, like time saved by not losing the preferred candidates at offer, right? So our offer acceptance rate is something like 96%. And I think that is because we're very clear around what we want. Because by the time people get to the offer stage, they're like, yep, this is what I want, right? And that makes a huge difference also.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I guess to try and bring some sort of actionable tips in for our listeners. It's always a bit of a problematic term because obviously building an employer value proposition shouldn't be about quick wins, but what 3 things would you say people can go and do tomorrow to start to build that EVP up and begin that journey?
Yeah, so I think as we talked about earlier, right, to me, it's really about getting down to like the insights or understanding what you're about. And if you have that, then you can design how you position yourself in the market around it, right? So one thing that we think a lot about is listening to our current employees as well as prospective candidates in terms of what they want, right? In terms of working for us or for companies similar to us. And again, as a result of doing that, we think about designing the way that we talk about ourselves around attracting those kinds of individuals and making sure that they keep them in the business. So I think that's a really simple thing that you can do, right? Just like sit down, talk to people, ask about what makes us different. Why did you choose to work here? What are the things that you wish we would do, right? And especially the folks who are have been with you the longest, you feel are really the high performing, high potential folks, because then you can start tailoring what you do around those individuals, and you want to attract more people like them, right? Because those are the people who have been successful in making your business successful. I think that's one really important thing. The other thing that a lot of companies do is benchmarking, right? I think it's something you should definitely do, but it's only one part of the puzzle. As I mentioned, if I have to choose between benchmarking or thinking through the current individuals that you have or you're trying to attract and what's going to be offered to them, I would much rather do that than just like, hey, I'm going to compare myself to Meta or Google or something, because you're not Meta, you're not Google, right? So it's one piece of the puzzle because you want to know how you compare, because you can talk about it. But I think you really want to design around the individuals that you have at the company now and those that you're trying to attract. I think that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. Really, really useful advice there. I think if I was to try and give people like 3 pointers, the first thing that I would say for people to do is write down what you have now, because it's almost certainly enough to start shouting about. Like, what are the reasons that you enjoy working at your company? It could be you like the fact that you've got the freedom to work from home 3 days a week. It could be you like the fact that you've got flexibility to be able to pick your kids up from school in the afternoon. It could be you like the fact that you can bring your dog to the office. There are lots of different things, and that also
It could be it's messy and chaotic and you don't know what you're doing yet. Like seriously, like
anything. It could be how fast paced it is, how much autonomy you have over your role. It could be really anything, and kind of distill that down, like write that down and start shouting about that, because that's a brilliant place to start. And then after that, I would then say, put that into kind of writing and say, these are all the reasons that we think it's great to work at this company. And then ask your employees, as you said, like asking for their feedback is incredibly important. And so many companies don't do it. But ultimately, where are you going to start if you don't know what people want? And I think it's important to sometimes try to balance your own expectations with that. I think people try to create employer value propositions that are going to be everything to everyone. Whereas actually, you can design an EVP that satisfies most people, but probably only 80% of people are going to be like totally happy. But 80% of people, the vast majority, is a great thing. So try to target 80% being super happy. But take the feedback of that employee survey and maybe pick out a couple of things that you then think you could implement and do. And then the third one within that is, once you've written it all down, started communicating it, and then tried to get that kind of survey feedback and get employee feedback back in, I would then go back and be like, each 6 months, you're going to review that and kind of put that framework in place. Because David, as you said, like it's an iterative process. It doesn't need to stand still, and different things will happen at different times. And one thing I would say actually in terms of quick wins, like what you could do literally tomorrow to overhaul everything, is think about bits of your EVP that are free. Your mission, your flexible working, enabling people to work from home, work from a different country for a month a year without those tax implications. Like there's loads of free stuff that you can do, and you won't need big budget sign off, but it will make your company a much more appealing place to work. So I definitely say that. I guess before we go on to questions, because I can see that we've got lots of different ones, and some of them actually are quite similar to the ones that we were going to cover anyway, so I think we'll throw them in. What are your least favorite red flags when it comes to how individuals and companies talk about employer value propositions?
Yeah, so I think we covered some of them, right? So a lot of them might be around just being bland or not identifying how you are unique or marketing the right things, right? So it is ultimately, the clues in the name, right? Employer value proposition, branding. It's about how it's about marketing and how you talk about yourselves and framing it. And so just I see a lot of times, even if you're a small startup or something like that, talking as if you're like a huge company. You're not, right? So don't pretend that you are, and don't market the same things just because you're copy pasting what another company has done that's been successful, right? I think there's a huge danger in doing that, because obviously, like, we're all looking for best practices, right? Or like things that we find out in the wild, but that's usually not the right thing for you to do at the stage that you are, right? Again, just because it worked for a big brand doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. The other thing is, as we talked about in terms of the clarity, right? Because you're trying to attract the right kinds of candidates. You're not trying to be right for everybody at every point in time. The lack of relevance, also specific to what we do. For example, misallocating the way that you're spending your like employee people budget, right? So a lot of times, people leaders or companies in general will say, it would be great X, Y, Z, right? Whatever. Drinks in the office, I don't know, whatever it might be, and it actually doesn't matter for the people you're trying to attract, right? So like being really specific around budget is always limited, right? Like and especially at early stages, and so you're always trying to find how can you get the maximum bang for your buck, and that involves flexibility to a certain extent, right? Because we're all different, we all have different needs, and not having that or considering that as part of what you do is a big miss in my book, because we're all different, we all work differently, and ultimately you're trying to make each individual as productive and as efficient as possible. Yeah, those are some things.
Brilliant. Love that. I think my biggest red flags, and it always makes me laugh how often I see these ones, is like, as we mentioned before, vague promises like open to flexible working. Terrible. Like, just don't say anything.
What does that mean, right?
Like, say we operate in a hybrid way. We expect people to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week, or we're remote first. We want people in the office once a month. Not hard. Second one would be upselling like objectively bad benefits, like free fruit. And you're like, why have you written that on your benefits list? Like, that's not a benefit.
Or again, we offer 20 in the UK, right? 20 plus days of holiday a year. Oh, great. Like, yeah.
I also think there's a real red flag in companies that keep their cards really close to their chest. So when you're trying to do your research on a company and you cannot find out anything about their employer value proposition, I do think that's a really big red flag. Another one is the time bound ones, like you get an extra 1 day of holiday for every 5 years you've worked at the company. Like, that's not going to keep anyone around. And then I think also companies, and this is a bit more of a niche one that I've definitely noticed, is a lot of companies will say they're really inclusive and that they want to improve DEI within their company, but actually their employer value proposition is very uninclusive and very rigid, and not very choice-based. So I think that's another red flag as well that I've really noticed, is like, to your point earlier, your employer value proposition needs to attract the right kind of people, and it needs to also talk to the culture that you've created. There's no point of talking about an EVP that is very at odds with the culture that you're creating, because ultimately it's not true.
Yeah, and evolving it over time. So I see a lot of companies, for example, market themselves as super flexible, or or like a family or so, but it's actually like really hard, like performance-oriented culture. And I was like, that's not going to work. Like, if you're about something where people get in and you're really about, working until 10 p.m. every day, and that's what you want, but you're marketing yourselves as, you can go home at 4, like, that's clearly not going to work, right? It's not about thinking about what everybody wants, but it's about like being right for that specific individual, right? Yeah.
And as Ilya said, like, the "we are like a family" here is definitely a big red flag. And as somebody earlier said, there needs to be a word equivalent to greenwashing for companies who say they're flex, but they aren't. From Vic, we actually call it flex washing, and it was the main reason for us starting our Flexa certification, was because, and that always blows my mind, when LinkedIn launched their filters of in-office, hybrid, or remote, which was like March of last year, 68% of companies ticked the remote box, but only 18% of them were actually fully remote. Like, there's a 50 percentage point difference between the truth and what was actually put out there, which I find mind-boggling, because they obviously want to appeal to the largest group of people possible, which is not going to work.
We see the same in benefits, right? People are like, we're flexible benefits. Okay, what does that mean? I can increase my pension contribution a little bit. That's not flexible. Kind of using that as a way to putting the flexibility to work in front of everything because it is in vogue and but when you look down the hood, it's not, right? I think that's a very dangerous thing to do as well because it's not what you are as an employer. So either you believe in it or not. I think that's really important.
Totally. I'm going to pop into the chat because I think both Ben and Flexa are hiring. And we can also show you, these are two brilliant examples of showcasing your EVP and being super transparent. Like you'll see in Ben's Flexa profile there that you're so transparent with all the benefits. You've got an amazing suite of benefits, brilliant flexibility. So these are kind of 2 pages to show you how you can showcase your EVP in the simplest possible way, because it means people can just search by those benefits and find you. You're hiring for lots of roles at the moment, so I thought I could do the shout out there.
Amazing. Yeah, please, if you're looking for a role and it aligns to what we offer, please come apply, work for us.
And we're hiring for a customer success manager at the moment as well. So obviously have a look through EVPs too. Before we go on to questions, just wanted to also say, like, obviously we've talked a lot about our 2 businesses and what we can offer. If you're interested in any other questions, please do add Ben. I keep wanting to call you Ben. Add David or myself on LinkedIn and drop us a message.
That's right.
Because we'd be delighted to chat further.
And you can call me Ben as well if you want. No problem.
Apparently it happens all the time, so I'm sorry. Great. So we have got so many questions. I think in the interest of making sure that we get through everyone's questions in time, I'll try and give a question to one or the other of us and try and alternate. So then we get questions there. So a good one from Carol is, what advice, I'll give this to you, David, what advice do you have for those having to develop their EVP from scratch? So where they feel like they've got nothing?
Yeah, I think we kind of addressed that earlier in a way, right? In terms of like, it is all about cataloging what do you have at the moment, starting, and it depends on where you are in the journey. But it is, and I think I wanted to double click on a point in terms of a lot of companies that I talk to also rely on surveying, right? They're like, hey, here's a survey with 5 questions, and think you're going to get a lot of insights from doing that. What we find more insightful is, for example, actually sitting down and talking to people, right? And so, for example, our people team is running an awesome initiative right now, are doing stay interviews, right, where we talk to each individual employer, like not an exit. Companies do that at this exit point when people are, ready to leave, and we're figuring out why they leave. And similar to how you think about benefits, it's about prevention, not curing, right? And so, doing things like stay interviews in a structured way still, but that usually gives more air, right? And for people to actually express what it is that makes you different. That is not just a couple comments on a survey. We're all busy. We know what it means. Like in terms of like sometimes we're like, hey, get the participation in a survey, but you just want to do it as quickly as possible. Where what you should do is actually sit down with a couple people and try to figure it out. Especially if it's that type of profile that you're looking to attract more of, right? So we talked about, for example, diversity inclusion. Like, what is it that would actually be meaningful to that individual? I think that's like the best thing that you can do and that you can start from before you do anything else.
Absolutely. Really, really good advice. I think every single company already has some form of employer value proposition. So
you just don't know what it is yet. Yeah.
Yeah. So do a big, get everybody into a room and workshop it, I think is a really good way to do it. Get everybody to write down on Post-its why they like working there, and you'll get something out of that.
And what they don't like as well. And that's the thing that sometimes people, it's like, what's great about it? What's not so great about it, right? Because you can also like that will inform it. Yeah.
Is there a way then you can address the stuff that people don't like by maybe adding other different bits and pieces in terms of benefits or ways of working as well? Another question in the chat is, interested in getting your thoughts on how we might turn up where potential employees are. Like, is it partnerships or events? So from an employer branding perspective, I'll take that one. As I mentioned at the beginning, getting your EVP in front of people that want to see it is basically the essence of employer branding. I think for a very long time, there's been a focus on employer brand, but not necessarily much knowledge or education on exactly how to do that. I think it's kind of been seen as like, because Glassdoor with reviews and social media, there's so much more to that. I write a newsletter weekly about mostly employer branding and flexibility. And one of the things that I covered was like the very basics of employer branding and like how to get that started. So you're right. Obviously, events can be very helpful if you know that there's your absolute target audience, but they can be very time consuming and sometimes quite cost inefficient. So I'd start with probably the easiest thing to do is being super transparent. So overhaul your careers page a bit. Start explaining about why you're a great place to work. Might not get loads of traffic there to begin with, but it's great to have that as a base for when people are searching. If they've maybe engaged with your company on a job description or elsewhere, they'll actually start searching for you and they'll find out more about what you're like to work as a company. Then get your employees, encourage people to share their stories about why your company is a great place to work. Employee advocacy is probably the most powerful element of employer branding. And that's obviously really centered around your EVP because it brings it to life. It makes people love stories and people believe other people. It's like a live review. So encourage people to do that, whether it's on LinkedIn or in blog posts. You can obviously highlight how people experience your company as a place to work. I'd also suggest, obviously, looking at Flexa as a place to get discovered for your EVP. It's the only platform where that does actually happen. And also looking at potentially doing some other sort of paid campaigns like you would in terms of marketing your products and services, but around, if you're in a hiring drive at that point, turning it into a marketing funnel and not just focusing on reactive kind of job application based hiring, but advertising why your company is a great place to work. So that's kind of my big tips on employer branding. I'll try and dig out the article as well and share it with you. But the most important place to start is transparency and get people shouting about it for you, because on LinkedIn, employees shouting about you as a place to work will get 561% more engagement than a company post will do. So it shows how powerful that network can be. And that one's free as well. So that's a nice quick one.
I think, yeah, just to double click on that point, because we do the same thing, right? We both profile folks who join the company at every level, and we have a little post on like why did they join, what makes them unique, what experience they have, etc., to highlight the types of people that we hire and that we want to attract. And then equally, as I mentioned before, right, like as soon as shout out to our talent team who started doing a lot of, for example, even things like TikTok videos and stuff like that to highlight what it is like to work for us, right? And like telling that through story is much better than a bland kind of job ad, right? And so we've seen massive success in doing that, and there's not a day that I don't, in terms of when I'm interviewing folks, get that as a comment in terms of like, one, love the job ads, two, love the videos that you guys are putting out there, because I think that makes it real, right? And like as you say, Molly, people love stories and can relate much more than us talking about ourselves as a company.
Absolutely. Another good one for you, because obviously literally the way that the Bend platform works is it's supposed to be about choice and tailoring it to individual employees. So Camille asked, how should a business navigate its EVP when it has a very diverse employee base that values different things?
That's awesome. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the best thing to do there is to talk about how you are tailoring it to each of the individuals in the company, right? And giving them, the flexibility to choose what's right for them. So you're not being dogmatic. We see a lot of companies who talk about flexibility, but then, as we talked about before, don't really mean flexibility, as in, you can choose certain things as long as it's not these things, right? And we see that especially with like more kind of sometimes traditional companies as well, would be like, we really believe in flexibility. We want to offer people a health and well-being budget, but they can only spend it on this particular gym. Well, that's not quite flexible, is it? So I think you want to be able to talk about how each individual can choose whatever it is that matters most to them and will make them most productive, obviously within different bounds, right? So a lot of times we get the question, for example, okay, Kate, you want to offer full flexibility, but as an employer, don't you believe that people should have medical insurance or something like that, right? And I think you can still say, hey, we as a business believe XYZ is important, therefore this is going to be the base, right? But after that, you can kind of choose whatever you want. And I think that's totally fine as well, right? Of saying, I think you mentioned the office and the remote stuff keep coming up over and over. It's totally fine to be like one day in the office, or like, this is what we believe is important for XYZ reasons. And then after that, you get full flexibility. I think that's totally fine. But again, goes back to clarity. It goes back to like trying to give the individual as much choice as you think should be there.
Yeah.
That's what works for us, at least.
Choice is so crucial. And I think ultimately that is what flexibility is, regardless of whether it's location, hours, benefits, all of those things. Like, it's about choice, but it's about a degree of choice or freedom within the framework. And I think very often, I've noticed it particularly with people's reactions to hybrid companies. They're like, that's not flexible because you're telling me to work in a certain way. But that's the case with remote as well. Like, you don't have the choice to go into an office. And I think we need to reframe the conversation around flexibility as there's a minimum expectation that might be 3 days a week in the office, or that might be 1 day a month, or it might be one team trip a quarter. But that is the expectation. And around that, you have choice. So with 3 days a week in the office, you have a choice 2 days a week to not be in the office and to work from home. You also have a choice not to work there. Like, ultimately, nobody has the right to flexibility, but you do have the right to choose the company that you're at. So it's very important, I think, that we frame the EVP and flexibility in that idea of there is a framework that balances business expectations and culture along with individual choice. And I think ultimately there's different degrees of that. It's all a spectrum. Hybrid is still flexible. It's just a different kind of flexibility. So I definitely think that if you've got a very diverse employee base with different needs, it's about probably having your central pillar of what you believe your employer value proposition is based on is that idea of choice. But with no boundaries comes ambiguity. So you also need to be very clear about what the expectations are. So I think it's all about embracing your bare minimum that you expect people to have and then allowing them to choose around that.
The other thing that comes up a lot sometimes is we offer choice, but amongst a bunch of stuff that is irrelevant. So that comes up quite often. It's like, hey, we have all of these, you can choose between all of these things, but they're like, yeah, but none of them apply to me. So you're not really offering choice, right? So like, I think it's choice with relevance, which really matters for a diverse population, is in like, hey, you offer the things that are important to me at this stage, at this point in my life. Because if you're offering a bunch of stuff that isn't relevant, it doesn't matter if you can choose between them. And sometimes it's easy to get those things confused, right? But they're not the same thing.
Would you like to choose between a rock or a hard place? It's like,
neither. Yeah.
Really good question from Lara that I think we should talk about based on what we've kind of seen in terms of hiring power through Flexa. So Lara asked, is there any advice for revamping your EVP to make it more attractive to candidates? We notice it's hard to hire unless we have huge salaries. I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it's one that, without knowing what you offer, it's quite difficult to unpick it. So feel free to message me on LinkedIn and we can have a chat about it, Lara. But in all likelihood, it's not, unless you offer something terrible, like 5 days a week in the office, set hours, absolutely no benefits apart from free food. It's very unlikely that what you have isn't enough to be able to appeal to people if salaries are kind of in line with the market average. I'd say it's more likely that it's not being put in the right places to appeal to the people that care about what you have. Hence why we talk about flexibility, talking about it on social media. If you're flexible, coming to us at Flexa, we can put it in front of millions of people that are looking for that. It's all about framing and marketing what you have. So unless, your EVP is objectively really bad, you should be able to appeal to people that don't require above average market salaries, especially not at the moment, because there's been a big shift where I'm sure everyone's heard of the Great Resignation that happened, but that was kind of peak and came to a sort of slight downward trend at the end of last year. But there's still above average resignations at the moment happening in both the UK and the US market. And the majority of them are driven by a lack of flexibility. So if you're offering flexible working, you should still be able to appeal to top talent. And when there's been research done into how much flexibility makes a difference versus salary, people say that flexibility is the equivalent of an 8 to 10% pay rise. Like, obviously pay somebody well still, but obviously flexibility enables you to be able to get top talent without necessarily paying significantly above market rates. So I think it's probably the way that you're marketing it rather than what you offer if you do offer flexibility.
I think the other thing about it is like reframing the conversation from just talking about salary to talking about like again total reward, right? Everything that you get from an employer, not just the salary. And again, as Molly I think made the point earlier, that can be different things, right? Performance, progression, outside responsibility, a job title that you might not get it as another company, responsibility over progression to management, whatever that is important, right? Benefits, obviously, everything else that comes with it, right? Because yeah, of course, salary is important, right? And it's going to be super attractive for a certain kind of individual, but it's not everything for everybody. And we've had multiple occasions, especially earlier on, when we didn't have a lot of money to pay for people, where people chose to take a little lower salaries because we aligned more with what they were looking for, right? And yeah, it can't be 50% off the mark, but I think it's really important about positioning whatever it is that important, or talking about things differently, right? We're a startup, we can offer equity. Yes, that may or may not be valuable depending on one, the performance of the business, or two, where you are and how you think about that. But it will be super valuable for some, right? And sometimes even letting them choose, right? We talk a lot about flexible pay, right, as an interesting concept as well, in terms of like, I want more. Definitely happens more in like commercial or sales teams, for example. I really believe in this, believe in my own performance. I can take a bigger risk here and do more variable pay, right? It doesn't have to be all the same thing. It's really easy to just say, hey, this is what it is and this is what you get. Again, flexibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. So another question from Lara is, how would you tailor an EVP in a small business in comparison to more corporate ones? So Ben, I did it again. Oh my God, sorry. David, you obviously mentioned about the evolution of an EVP, and I think that your answer on that really, really plays into it. I think when you're a startup, capital is often very limited. You're trying to attract people who are comfortable with uncertainty, lots of learning
That's right.
opportunities, lots of flexibility. Whereas a corporate one, it might be about more security, better pay, more secure progression that's like linear. It's much more around probably quite generous monetary benefits, whether that's enhanced parental leave or private healthcare or life insurance, those kind of things. So it's very interesting to try to understand your employees' expectations at each stage of the business as well. But thinking about what makes your company uniquely your company, I think, like startups are so different to corporates. So try to bring in benefits that complement the stage of company and like life cycle stage that you're at as well. Naturally, one of the big ones is going to be exciting opportunity. Like if you end up with share options in a startup that becomes a unicorn, you retire. Like that's one of the reasons that people join startups, whereas people join corporates because they want security and potentially to have great mat leave and flexible working.
The other thing that I would say on that is usually as a small company, right, to again play into to your strengths. So you can be a lot more original around what you offer, right? So like as a large company, it's really hard to be like, hey, this is how we're building our value proposition. This is what we offer in terms of benefits. This is what we do around flexibility, etc. Because you're constrained a lot of the times, right? Both in terms of, getting that approved and signed up, etc. Also because the more that you add, the harder it is to manage all of these things, right? If you're trying to actually personalize that experience, whereas a small organization, you can chop and change, right? You can have the conversation with a candidate and be like, XYZ is really important to you. Okay, great. I'm going to tailor this against what you need. So I think you have to play to your strengths, right? And the same is true for a large organization in the sense of, as you mentioned, right, security is a thing that might be important to you in terms of job security, etc. And yeah, so I think it's just being very cognizant of how you can leverage what you have and what you are, and not trying to do what somebody else. A lot of times, large organizations will be like, "Hey, we want to be innovative or do whatever, so we're going to do the beanbag in the office, right? Or like at a ping pong table." That's like the classic. It doesn't mean anything, right? We're a startup too. No, you're not.
Yeah, it's very different at that point. Shannon's asked about which companies we'd recommend to look at as great examples of EVP. I'd have a few off the top of my head, one of which would be Ben. Actually, I think the way that you've kind of outlined benefits and all that choice around it is amazing. And we obviously shared your company profile in the chat earlier. I'd also, for an example of an amazing EVP from a big corporate, I'd have a look at Mars, both on Flexa and on LinkedIn. Their LinkedIn game is exceptionally strong. They're really good at showcasing employee stories. And another example of great employee advocacy is Nielsen IQ. I really admire a lot of the work that they're doing. And then actually another Flexified company that I think is brilliant at doing what we were talking about earlier in terms of managing expectations about what that minimum commitment is and then having choice around it is Huel. I'll actually put them in the chat as well. I think Huel do a great job of being super clear about what's expected. And all of the kind of reviews that we collected for them really do showcase that. And it's about the fact that they own the fact that people are expected to work really, really hard, but that they're going to be given a lot in return. And I think that's a great way, if that's what really matters in your company culture, your EVP should be shaped around that. So have a look at Huel. I've popped them in the chat there. Conscious we've only got a couple of minutes left. One question from Laura was the average saving for cost per hire for a solid EVP. I wish a study had been done on that, but I don't think one has. All I know is that by leaning on your EVP, I mean, I can use Flexa as an example there. Like, we've never spent a penny on hiring. We've only ever done it through Flexa, through leaning on flexibility and culture. And obviously I used an example of one of our clients that reduced their cost to hire by 90% through showcasing their EVP. I think there are lots of different small examples, but it'd be really interesting to actually run a study on that, I reckon.
I think you should do that, Molly. Like,
yeah.
That's a good idea.
Kind of try and collect all the data from different companies. I think it'd be fascinating. Last question for you, David, before we kind of wrap up quickly. What, in your view, most endangers a good company EVP? Like, what would be some toxic things that could suddenly turn a good EVP into a bad one?
I think we touched on it before, right? So to me, is like marketing the wrong thing, or like doing the copy pasting thing, or just saying something that you're not just because you want to attract, have a bigger top of funnel. Yeah. I think that's the most dangerous thing, and it's so easy to do as well, right? To be like, hey, we just want position ourselves as the best for everybody, but you're not the best for everybody, right? You're the best for a particular type of person.
Yeah, or saying something that isn't true as well, because then I think internally it makes you look very bad as well. Because if you're trying to be something externally that you're not internally, that's naturally going to have a very negative effect. Brilliant. Well, we've almost come to the end. I was just going to ask everybody in the chat if you have any requests for what we do as our next workshop. Please hit me with ideas. You know, obviously we've covered EVP this time. There's so much that we can cover in the future. So if you've got any ideas, please do put them in the chat. Otherwise, you will get a follow-up with both mine and with David's details as well. Please do reach out to us on LinkedIn if you're interested in what we're doing, or if we didn't answer your question. I'm sorry, I know that we did have a few kind of left over, but we're very happy to answer via LinkedIn message. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us and for sparing an hour of your time. And please do share this link with anybody that you think would find an on-demand webinar useful. Cool. Thank you so much. I will leave you all here. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.